Hi, welcome to my happy spot. For those who don't know me, my name is Macky Cilliers and I'm a passionate quilter and fiber artist. Welcome to my very first tutorial. Today I'm going to do an introductory tutorial on fabric weaving, which I use a lot in my course as borders, and a lot of people have shown interest in this. What you do to start off with is you select the size you need out of which you're going to cut whatever you're going to make. In this case, it's only a tiny little piece because we will end up making a spectacle case. You need a foundation fabric. This need not be fancy at all. Any scrap fabric you have. I even use old sheets. You then select a piece of fabric to go on top of that. And also this, I'm not precious about what I use. It doesn't have to be 100% cotton. I even use decorative fabrics. Then you will cut strips that will fit across that. You need an equal amount of strips, right? Now what you do is you just put them down. It doesn't matter how, just put them down any old how. There we go. And at this stage you can stand back and decide how you want to place them. Now what you do need to bear in mind though is on an outer edge you need to go, often it's better to start with a wider strip. So let's put that one there next. Then let's try that one. Possibly that one next. I think that one. That one, and I'm going to end off with a wider strip again. And what you do is you just stand back and do the squeeze your eyes bit to see if anything really bothers you. But those who know me know that not much bothers me. Anyway, there we are. That's the next step. So you've got a foundation piece of fabric. Doesn't matter out of what you use there. Next you have a piece of fabric that is of equal size on top of it. What I forgot to mention is that when I choose that base fabric, the one this one here, what I would consider there is that I would use something with a really in-your-face design that's going to really pop up when we do the weaving. I love to use stripes here because it will just give a different movement as you do the weaving. Anyway, let's move on to the next step. Right, next step. What I did next was I removed my strips in the order that I'd put them down. If you remember, this one was on the outer edge there and that one was there, and they went that way. So what I did was I started with the green one and I put them on top of each other in the order that they had been along here, ending with the blue one, right? What I do then is my top piece of fabric, I just use a pair of scissors and I cut. And what I've done here, I think I've done nine cuts, you'll see. 9 of them all along here. And really just eyeball them. It's not necessary to do this with a rotary cutter. Vary the widths. You can see that I've varied the widths. There's a skinny one and a bigger one. But when you cut through, don't cut right through. Leave a thread hold. Leave a thread hold over there. Right? It just makes it easier to put your first row in without messing everything up. And what you do next is you just weave your strips in between. I'm sure many of you did those maths at school when you were little. Right. So it was over. Next one is under. Right. And this is where I thread hold, pin in to hold it in place. Right, next one is under, cut the thread hold, over, pin, next one on top. Right, that's the first row done. Right, now we'll take that one away. That's the one we've just done. And we start with the next one. Obviously, the next one goes on top. And you just move it right in next to that first one. Oh my word. Next one over. Now I always tell my students, because I lived in the bush in Zimbabwe, I never went to preschool. So if you see me struggling with this, please feel sorry for me. I lost out on my early childhood, I'm afraid. My early learning, not my childhood. I had a wonderful childhood. Right. And all you do is you just make sure the tension of that is nice and firm. Not too tight, but nice and firm. Move everything up. Pin in there to hold it. We'll just do one more quickly. Underneath. Make sure it's nicely lined up. And that is actually just how simple this is. Now, because this is the first tutorial on this, I do far more complicated ones, as many of you know from my quilts. But this basic one is just such an easy way to learn all the techniques. And so you go. Right, now, as you see, this little strip here, and this often happens, because sometimes I'm just desperate to use a little strip of fabric, but it's just not long enough. So what I do, you'll see that one is too short, right? There. All I do is I let it, release it up there, pull it down into place here, pin this one down, and the fact that it's actually too short is nobody will ever know, because it's hidden under that one there. How simple is that? Right. So this is what you would do. You would just carry on weaving all your strips into place. Right, we're ready to stitch down our strips. And what I then first do is I like to use a variegated thread. You don't have to, but I like to use a variegated thread. It just adds another element of interest on top of your fabric. I also then go to my running zigzag stitch, which is number 4 on my Bernina. And what I do is I just switch it on and I pop it up twice. So it's not quite as narrow as it is when you switch it on, but also not too wide. Just 2 little pushes on the button does it for me. Right. I'm now going to do my running stitch and use my running stitch, and I'm going to stitch down all the strips this way and this way. But what you need to bear in mind is that these strips are lying loose on top here. right? All of these that you've woven through. So when you stitch this way, as you stitch, you're favoring the raw edge. You're favoring the strip you've woven in. So right, I would stitch along there. I'd swing out very slightly, absolutely very slightly. Out that way, back this way, out that way, back this way, right? And I would go along all my strips. The other way, your base fabric is now the raw edge, right? So you would do the same thing. See, those are all, where it lifts up, those are raw edges. So you would, when you stitch, you would favor the raw edges of that. And that's what you do next. Using your number 4 running stitch, and I use an open-toed embroidery foot, number 20 on my Bernina. I just switch on, like I say, 2 little presses to get it up slightly wider, and away I go. We're not finished yet, but I would just like to remind you to like and subscribe. Thank you. Right, as I said, number 4, which is my running zigzag, just 2 little bump ups, makes it a little bit wider. Now I'm favoring the raw edges, which in this case are the strips. You can see I'm just making sure that I catch my raw edges as I stitch. Right, once I've done that strip, I would then start going down this way. And in that way, you can see on the back. Oh, and I put any old bobbin that I want to finish up, any bobbin underneath. It never shows up, and if it does, just adds another little bit of interest. So whatever colors you have on your bobbins, that's fine. Right, when I've gone this way and that way with my zigzag, and I've stitched all my edges down, I give it an iron, and then I decide on the colors I'm going to use on top. Now what I did here, I went through my, and I'm also not fussy about what threads I use. To me, it's about the color. Right, those are the colors I decided to use. Now, if you look at my completed top, you will see, I'll come to that, but there's some heavy stitching on there. And I've done it in 3 different colors. So for those, I decided to use these 3 colors, right? So I've put them aside. For my basic, the stitching I do the most of, I've chosen the most neutral color, which I felt was that one. And then the other 4 I've kept aside for the other stitching. Right, now what I do next is, and I'm just going to draw on some little scrap pieces of paper I have here. I better take this out the way. On my piece of fabric, I would perhaps take, it doesn't really matter. So I decide to take the orange, and I would stitch this up and down like that. Right. Turn my piece, stitch up and down like that. Right. Out of another color, I would possibly stitch like that. then go the other way. Oh my goodness. And I will just do this wavy. Right. I would possibly stitch that way. This is all to add interest. The more stitching you add, the better it looks. And you will find that the stitching, it doesn't really matter what you stitch, it all disappears in the end. Because that is the first one. That is going on top of that. That is going on top of that. And so I would just stitch as it pleased me. My neutral, the color I thought was the most neutral, I would possibly just fill in. With very close. Right. Another one would just be your I'm catching on the machine. Right, and then right at the end, when you felt you stitched enough, you probably need to stitch a bit more. A lot of people don't believe me, but the more you stitch, the better it looks. Then when I really feel I've done enough of this basic stitching, I then select, in this case I only chose the 3 colors there, and I put my machine on my top stitch, which is number 6 on my Bernina, and I take it up to 4, so it's quite a long stitch. It's the stitch that goes back and forward and then back, that one. So it's a really good strong thick stitch, and I just do a random pattern over my piece. I would maybe just go from there to there, possibly 3 times each on a little piece like I've done here. And I would take the next color and just take it over. It really doesn't matter, and I decorate it with a few thicker lines, and that is all my stitching done. Let's talk about the stitching a bit. Like I say, I mostly just use running stitches. Those straight stitches that I drew for you, where I went up and down that way, and the sort of wavy lines and whatever, I just did those with my open foot embroidery, with my open toed embroidery foot. When it got to the real absolutely random stuff, obviously I dropped my feed dogs and put on this little foot here, that little foot there, which is also open toed, and just did free motion quilting, basically free motion stitching all over. Like I said before, I'm not fussy about the threads that I use. Apart from that, I'm going for color. And I stitch a lot because to me, as you stitch, the more you stitch, the magic happens. But sometimes you don't actually want to stitch that much. We'll talk about that in perhaps one of the next videos when I go into the more intricate um, designs that I use. But really that is it, and you can see how this piece of woven, how it's transformed. I'll bring back my next sample. From that to that, I love it. Right, I'm going to bring another piece forward. That one was done with just 2 fabrics and a more complicated design, which I said we'll get to that later in another tutorial. But that was just 2 fabrics. Another one. Another one. And this one. Right. Once you've used your open-toed embroidery foot, and you've stitched down all your strips, all the raw edges of the strips, I then go into the stitching that I do over the whole piece of fabric. Now, as I said in the beginning, I use a lot of different colors and I stitch in many different directions. It really doesn't matter which, but I've worked out these different ways of doing it because it gives me a lot of coverage. Now, one of them, like I said, is just the going up and down. Let's put that down. I like to work with my needle in the down position. And all I would do is just zigzag up and down in one direction and again in another. Right, so I would do my zigzag this way and that way, and as you can see from my drawings, I use many other ways of stitching on this piece. The things to bear in mind, I like to use an machine embroidery needle. It just seems to work better for me. The other thing that I like to do is I sometimes use machine embroidery threads. They just give it a little bit of sheen. You may, even if you wish, you may use metallics. Anything that adds interest as far as the threads you use. It depends on the look I'm going for. If I'm doing something on a more ethnic quilt, I'd obviously just use just these. They're very low in sheen, and I don't particularly always want in an ethnic quilt for it to be very shiny. But machine embroidery threads are lovely to use as well. And the whole idea is just, like I say, to stitch all over as close as possible together. Machine embroidery needle, machine embroidery foot, number 20, it's open-toed and you can see exactly where you're going. I use this on, I don't know if you have one on any of your machines, but this Benina has this and it's wonderful. I didn't use it now while I was stitching, but as you move your knee, it lifts the foot and it makes it so much easier to turn your work. Right, the other thing to bear in mind with the stitching is just to really stitch until, let me just go back, sorry, to this piece here. These, they almost get like they get a texture all of their own. I just love it. it's no good just doing a little bit of stitching. Like I say, you stitch to where you've stitched, and you probably need to stitch more, because there's a place where magic takes over and the whole piece is transformed. When it comes to the actual stitches on my machine, I use my running stitch a lot. I bump it up to at least 3. I sometimes use some of the other decorative stitches as well. Again, I have a banana, depending on what you have. But just a word of caution. I wouldn't get into using little rows of ducks or, I don't know, your really cutie pie little designs. They don't do it for me. I don't think they're appropriate for the look I'm trying to get. But there again, it's your piece, and the choice is yours. But I would not go with any of those very cutie pie designs. But there are some lovely, test them, and particularly if you use a thicker thread, like a top stitch thread, they can be very effective. But the whole idea, like I say, is just to stitch as much as possible in as many different directions, use as many different colors as possible. On some of mine, I use up to possibly even 12, 15 different colors. And maybe it doesn't make sense to some people, but it makes sense to me. Right, and that is it. Just keep going. Pour yourself a glass of wine. Put on some music. In this room of mine, it would probably be Elvis. And go for it. There we go. First lot of stitching done. Now what I would do is go the other way. And that would be my first color done. Do my zigzag up and down. Right, now I've done the zigzag in the green. When I do my wavy one, doesn't matter, would go for that color, right? Now, when it comes to the free motion stitching, I would obviously change from an open toe embroidery foot to my open toed, there we go, to that one, foot number 24, drop my feed dogs, right. And what possibly would be a good idea here is to put on my quilting gloves. Gives you a better grip. Right, not too heavy on the foot, your machine. Nice and slow, and the movement up here nice and even. Nice and even. And if you cross over other stitches, it really doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what is in the bottom of your bobbin, like I said, it's a good way of using up colors you no longer want. Right, I won't complete the whole piece, but that's the idea. And For the straight lines, like I said, I would go to my number 6, which is my top stitch, and possibly I'd bump it up to at least 4, get a nice long strong stitch, and put in, I choose one of these, feed dogs up again, change to the back to the open-toed embroidery foot, and actually let's put in a nice strong color so that you can see. There we go. Right, so, and you just stitch until you're happy with it.